October 15, 2012. This arrangement isn't working anymore, James said, not even meeting my eyes. He fidgeted with the remote, flipping channels restlessly, while Jessica perched on the arm of the sofa, a picture of composure, if a rather chilly one. I sat across from them, clutching my teacup, the porcelain warm against my still trembling hands. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. The house, our house, felt suddenly vast and unfamiliar. James finally looked at me, his expression a strange mix of guilt and irritation. "Mom, it's just too much," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze again. Jessica took over, her voice crisp and efficient. "We've discussed this, James. It's best if you're honest." She turned those sharp eyes on me. "Maggie, your being here has become inconvenient." The word hung in the air like a slap. I had lived in this house for 30 years, raised James here, nurtured the very garden Jessica now meticulously pruned. My late husband, Richard, and I had built this life together, brick by brick, memory by memory. And now, barely 6 months after his passing, I was being deemed inconvenient. "I don't understand," I stammered, my throat constricting. "Where am I supposed to go?" Jessica smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her skirt. "We've arranged for you to stay at the Meadowbrook Motel for a week," she said, her tone as bland as unbuttered toast. "That should give you ample time to make other arrangements." A week in a rundown motel, after a lifetime in this home. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles turning white. James finally spoke, his voice strained. "Look, Mom, it's not like that. It's just Jessica, and I need our space. We're starting a family. My own son was using the impending arrival of his child as justification to cast me out. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, a hysterical, breathless sound caught in my chest. "Right," I managed, my voice a dry rasp. "A family, and I'm extra piece." Jessica's lips thinned. "Don't make this more difficult than it has to be, Maggie," she said, her voice edged with steel. "We're doing what's best." Best for whom? Certainly not for me. I looked around the room, at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the mantelpiece, ghosts of happier times. It was clear my time here was over. They had made their decision, and I, in my grief-stricken state, had become nothing more than a burden. "I'll pack my things," I said, rising on shaky legs. My voice, though quiet, held a new, unfamiliar steeliness. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't plead. I would leave with whatever dignity I had left. Jessica nodded curtly, relief flickering across her face. As I climbed the stairs to my room, the weight of their rejection pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. But even amidst the despair, a tiny ember of resolve began to glow. This was not the end. This was a beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not be broken by this. I would rebuild, and perhaps, just perhaps, I would find a way to remind them of the mother they had so casually discarded. The packing didn't take long. Years of accumulated memories, reduced to a few suitcases and boxes. I touched each item, a fleeting caress, a silent goodbye. Photographs of Richard, his smile warm and reassuring, a hand-wear-upon shawl, a gift from my own mother long gone. A small, worn book of poetry, its pages filled with handwritten notes. These were the treasures of my life, the tangible remnants of a love and a history they couldn't comprehend, much less appreciate. As I carried the last box downstairs, Jessica stood by the front door, holding a crisp white envelope. "Here," she said, extending it towards me. "A little something to help you get settled." I took the envelope, the thinness of it a stark reminder of their perceived generosity. Inside, a few $100 bills, barely enough to cover a week at the motel they'd so graciously provided. "Thank you," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. There was nothing more to say. James hovered in the background, his face a mask of discomfort. He mumbled something about calling me later, but the words felt hollow, empty promises meant to assuage his own guilt. I didn't reply. I simply walked past them, out the front door, and into the crisp autumn air. The world stretched before me, vast and uncertain. But as I stepped away from the house that had once been my sanctuary, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The weight of their rejection, though still heavy, had also ignited a spark within me, a spark of defiance, a spark of hope. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do, but I knew I would survive, and more than that, I would thrive. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my grief for weakness. They would learn. They would all learn. The late afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, baking the cheap suitcase at my feet. "Just get out, Mom," Jessica had said, her voice as cold as the metal of the doorknob she held inches from my face. "We don't have room for you anymore." I stood there, numb, clutching a small, worn purse. This was it. The house I'd shared with my late husband, the home where I'd raised my son, James, was now forbidden territory. Everything I owned, the remnants of a life built over decades, was crammed into two battered suitcases. The other one lay beside me, equally forlorn. "I don't understand," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Where am I supposed to go?" Jessica sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound that grated on my nerves. "That's your problem, Mom, not ours." And with that, she shut the door, the click echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. I stared at the closed door, a wave of dizziness washing over me. My own son, influenced by his wife, had just thrown me out. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I'd given them everything, always put their needs before my own. James had been my world after his father passed away, and I'd naively thought he felt the same. Now, here I was, standing on the curb with nothing but the clothes on my back and a few meager possessions. The sun felt oppressive, the air thick and heavy. I took a shaky breath, trying to gather myself. "It's all right," I murmured to myself, though the words felt hollow, meaningless. I bent down, the strain in my back a sharp reminder of my age, and picked up the suitcases. They were heavier than I expected, weighed down not just by clothes and trinkets, but by the crushing weight of betrayal. Where could I go? I had a few $100 tucked away in my purse, enough for a few nights in a cheap motel. But after that the thought trailed off, a cold dread spreading through me. I couldn't impose on any of my friends, not like this. Pride, a strange, stubborn flicker in the face of such devastation, kept me from reaching out. I'd always been independent, capable. I wouldn't be a burden. Dragging the suitcases behind me, I started walking. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a desperate need to put distance between myself and that closed door, that symbol of my son's rejection. The streets of my neighborhood, once so familiar, now felt alien. Each house, each neatly manicured lawn, seemed to mock me with its stability, its sense of belonging. I felt like a ghost, adrift in a world that no longer had a place for me. As I walked, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a cruel irony considering the bleakness of my own situation. I found myself in front of a small park, the swings swaying gently in the evening breeze. Children's laughter drifted across the grass, a poignant reminder of happier times, of a life I no longer recognized. I sat down on a bench, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the vibrant colors of the sunset. How had my life come to this? I'd always been a strong woman, a survivor. I'd nursed my husband through his illness, managed the household finances, and held everything together. Now I felt broken, adrift, utterly alone. I opened my purse, pulling out the small wad of cash. It wasn't much, but it was all I had, enough for a few nights at the Sunset Motel, a rundown establishment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. For now, as darkness descended, I hauled myself up, the weight of the suitcases pressing down on me, a physical manifestation of the burden I carried. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows. I walked on, towards the uncertain future, a chilling premonition settling in my heart. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I wiped the tears from my eyes, a new resolve hardening my gaze. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea how wrong they were. The humiliation burned, a slow, steady fire in my chest. But within that fire, something else was ignited, a quiet determination, a seed of something that felt like hope. I would rebuild. I would find my own way, and they would regret the day they turned their backs on me. The Sunset Motel beckoned, a temporary refuge, but in my mind, I was already building something else, something bigger, something they could never take away. The faint scent of jasmine carried on the night air, a whisper of promise, a hint of the blossoming yet to come. The flickering neon sign of the Sunset Motel cast long shadows across Route 9, a stark contrast to the life I once knew. Weeks had blurred into a monotonous cycle of instant coffee, stale donuts, and the drone of traffic outside my window. "You're better off on your own, Mom," Jessica had said, her voice tight, eyes averted. "Julian and I need space. They needed my space, the space my late husband and I had built together, brick by brick, the space I'd nurtured, filled with memories, laughter, and the aroma of Sunday dinners. Now, it was their space, and I was relegated to this cramped, musty room with its peeling wallpaper and perpetually damp bathroom. Each morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, the same heavy realization pressing down on me. I was adrift, unmoored, living a life I never could have imagined. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional cough from the man in the next room or the insistent hum of the mini-fridge. I'd stare at the faded floral pattern on the curtains, tracing the outlines with my finger, lost in thought. What had I done to deserve this? I'd dedicated my life to my family, always putting their needs before my own. Your father would be ashamed of you, I'd murmured to myself, the words catching in my throat. Shame. It was a heavy cloak I wore constantly, a constant reminder of my displacement. The days bled into one another, marked only by the changing channels on the small, flickering television. I watched daytime talk shows, game shows, anything to distract myself from the reality of my situation. The canned laughter grated on my nerves, a hollow echo of the joy that once filled my life. One afternoon, a cooking show caught my attention. A young chef, vibrant and enthusiastic, was demonstrating how to prepare a complex French dish. It's all about the layering of flavors, she'd explained, her hands moving with practiced ease. I watched, mesmerized, a flicker of something igniting within me, layering, building, creating. The thought lingered, a seed planted in the barren landscape of my despair. I'd always loved gardening. Back at the house, I'd spent hours tending to my roses, nurturing them, watching them bloom. They're almost as beautiful as you, Mom. James had teased me once, a rare moment of tenderness. The memory brought a bittersweet pang to my chest. Those roses, like so much else, were gone now. But what if I could start again? What if I could find a way to recreate that beauty, that sense of purpose, in this desolate place? The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. I started small, buying a few packets of seeds from a nearby convenience store. I filled a styrofoam cup with soil scavenged from a patch of dirt behind the motel and planted the seeds, carefully watering them with the lukewarm water from the bathroom sink. You shouldn't be doing that. The motel manager, a gruff man with a perpetually sour expression, said one day, catching me tending to my makeshift garden. It'll attract bugs. I simply nodded, ignoring his disapproval. These tiny seeds, these fragile sprouts, represented more than just plants. They represented hope, resilience, a refusal to be broken. They were a symbol of my determination to rebuild, to create something beautiful out of the wreckage of my life. I spent hours researching different plant species, learning about their needs, their vulnerabilities, their potential. The local library became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the confines of my small room and immerse myself in the world of botany. I devoured books on horticulture, poring over diagrams and charts, absorbing every bit of information I could find. It's amazing what you can learn from these books, I'd commented to the librarian one afternoon, surprised by my own newfound passion. She'd smiled, encouraging my curiosity. One day, while browsing through a discarded magazine in the motel lobby, I came across an article about a local garden center looking for part-time help. Experience preferred, but not required, they had stated. My heart leaped. It was a long shot, but it was a chance. I carefully tore out the page, smoothing out the creases, clutching it like a lifeline. The next morning, I put on my best clothes, a simple blouse and skirt, carefully ironed, and took the bus to the garden center. The interview was nerve-wracking. Sarah Mitchell, the owner, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for detail. "So you have no formal training in horticulture?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," I admitted, "but I have a passion for plants. I've always had a green thumb. I told her about my makeshift garden at the motel, about my hours spent researching different species. To my surprise, she seemed intrigued. "I'll give you a trial period," she said finally. "1 week. If you prove yourself, we'll talk about a permanent position." Walking out of the garden center, I felt a surge of hope, a feeling I hadn't experienced in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild, to regain a sense of purpose, a chance, perhaps, to prove Jessica and Julian wrong. As I boarded the bus back to the motel, I glanced at the small, crumpled ad in my hand. It was more than just a job offer. It was a seed of possibility, planted in the fertile ground of my resilience, waiting to bloom. The flickering neon sign of the Sunset Motel no longer seemed as bleak. It was simply a temporary stop on my journey, a stepping stone to something more, something bigger, something they could never have imagined. Rain lashed against the library windows, mirroring the storm inside me. Just a few days ago, Jessica had stood in my living room, hands on her hips, telling me I was dead weight. Dead weight. Now, here I was, huddled over a library computer, searching for any job, anything to get me back on my feet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a dull ache in the quiet of the computer lab. I typed entry-level jobs into the search bar, my fingers stiff and clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard. A jumble of listings filled the screen, everything from fast food to retail. None of it felt right. "Anything will do," I murmured to myself, scrolling through page after page. My stomach growled, a sharp reminder that I hadn't eaten properly in days. The vending machine in the corner beckoned, but I counted the coins in my purse, barely enough for bus fare. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. "Focus, Maggie," I muttered, trying to push down the rising panic. "Just find something, anything to start." I clicked on a link for a local garden center, Sarah's Green Thumb. They were looking for a part-time cashier. Not ideal, I thought, but it was something. I'd always enjoyed gardening with my husband, tending to our small patch of roses. A wave of sadness washed over me, the memory still so raw. I pushed it away, focusing on the task at hand. I printed out the application, the paper warm in my hands. It felt like a small victory, a tiny flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. As I filled out the application, a familiar scent wafted through the air, the earthy aroma of damp soil and blooming flowers. It transported me back to happier times, to sunny afternoons spent pruning roses with my husband. He would have loved this place, I thought, a bittersweet smile playing on my lips. I could almost hear his voice, gentle and encouraging. "You've got this, Maggie." The thought bolstered my spirits. I finished filling out the application, my handwriting surprisingly steady. I walked over to the librarian, a young woman with bright pink hair. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you tell me where the nearest post office is?" She pointed me down the street, her smile warm and genuine. "Good luck with your application," she called out as I left. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a faint rainbow arced across the sky. It felt like a sign, a promise of better days to come. I walked towards the post office, the application clutched tightly in my hand. It was just a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something hopeful. As I dropped the application into the mailbox, I felt a surge of determination. I might be down, but I was not out. Jessica's words echoed in my mind dead weight. "I'll show them," I whispered, a new steel in my voice. "I'll show them all." I might not have much now, but I had my pride, my resilience, and a growing sense that this was just the beginning of my story. This small act, mailing this application, felt like planting a seed that, with time and care, I knew would blossom into something beautiful, something they could never take away from me. The faint scent of petrichor hung in the air, the promise of growth and renewal after the storm, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of anticipation for what lay ahead. I didn't know exactly how, not yet, but I knew I would rebuild my life, and it would be even more magnificent than before. This time, it would be all mine. The flickering neon sign of the Mitchell's Garden Center buzzed incessantly, a counterpoint to the quiet hum of the refrigerator keeping the cut flowers fresh. I punched the clock, the metallic click echoing in the otherwise empty office. Another 4 hours, another $4 closer to, well, not much. 4 more hours closer to another night in that motel. "Maggie," I muttered to myself, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I straightened the stack of invoices on the desk, my hand lingering on a faded photograph tucked beneath the blotter. It was James, Jessica, and me taken at their wedding. Jessica had insisted on a lavish affair, a destination wedding no less, and James, as usual, had caved to her every whim. "Mom, it's just money," he'd said, his voice tight. "You always said family is more important." How ironic those words felt now, echoing in the cavernous emptiness of my life. They had made it abundantly clear just how unimportant I was to their family. Mr. Mitchell, the owner, a kind of somewhat eccentric man, poked his head into the office. "Maggie, you wouldn't happen to have finished those inventory reports?" he asked, his voice a gentle rumble. "Almost, Mr. Mitchell," I replied, forcing a smile, just double-checking a few figures. The truth was, I'd finished them hours ago. There wasn't much else to do. The bookkeeping job was barely part-time, just enough to keep a roof, albeit a leaky one, over my head. He nodded, his gaze lingering on the wilting potted ferns near the window. "Those Boston ferns are looking a bit peaked, aren't they?" he commented, more to himself than to me. "Think they're past saving." I glanced at the ferns. They were indeed drooping, their fronds brown and brittle. "Maybe not," I found myself saying, surprised by my own boldness. "They just need a little TLC." Mr. Mitchell chuckled. "TLC? How? Well, you're welcome to try, Maggie. Can't hurt at this point." He shuffled off, leaving me staring at the neglected plants. An odd feeling of purpose stirred within me. Back in the days when James was still a boy and my late husband, John, was still alive, we'd had a thriving garden. John had been the green thumb, but I'd always enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of nurturing the seedlings, watching them grow. Maybe this was a way to reconnect with that part of myself, a part I thought I'd lost along with everything else. I spent the rest of the afternoon tending to the ferns, carefully pruning the dead leaves, repotting them in fresh soil, and whispering encouragement like they were old friends. It was meditative, calming, a welcome distraction from the gnawing anxiety that usually consumed me. By the time Mr. Mitchell returned, the ferns, though still fragile, held a hint of renewed life. "Well, I'll be," he said, his eyes widening in surprise. "You've worked some magic, Maggie. They actually look better." A small smile crept onto my face. "Just a little bit of care," I replied, dusting off my hands. The next day, I arrived at the garden center to find Mr. Mitchell excitedly pointing to a shelf filled with wilting orchids. "Maggie, my girl," he boomed, "think you can work your magic on these beauties too?" I hesitated. The orchids looked even worse than the ferns had, their delicate petals drooping like broken wings. "I can try, Mr. Mitchell," I said, "but no promises." Over the next few weeks, I became the unofficial plant rehabilitator of Mitchell's Garden Center. I spent my days nurturing neglected plants back to health, discovering a knack for coaxing life back into seemingly hopeless cases. Word of my green thumb spread, and soon customers were specifically requesting my help with their ailing plants. Mr. Mitchell, delighted by the increased business, gave me a raise and more hours. One afternoon, while repotting a particularly stubborn cactus, I overheard two women talking near the checkout counter. I heard she was practically homeless. One whispered to the other, their voices hushed but not hushed enough. "Kicked out by her own son." No less. My stomach clenched. I knew they were talking about me. Gossip traveled fast in a small town. "Can you imagine?" the other woman replied. "Such a shame. But look at her now, making something of herself." I focused on the cactus, my fingers carefully navigating the sharp spines. Their words stung, but they also ignited a flicker of something else: pride, resolve. Later that day, Mr. Mitchell called me into his office. "Maggie," he began, his voice unusually serious, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." My heart pounded. Was he going to let me go? Had the whispers finally caught up with me? "I've been watching you, Maggie," he continued, "and I'm impressed. You have a real gift with these plants. I'm thinking expansion." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "I'm thinking we could create a whole new section devoted to plant rehabilitation. Maggie's Miracle Garden, we could call it. What do you say?" I stared at him, speechless. A wave of emotion washed over me: relief, gratitude, and something else, a sense of triumph, small but potent. I don't know what to say, Mr. Mitchell," I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion. He smiled. "Say yes, Maggie, say yes," and I did. I said yes, because in that moment, I realized that my low point, the humiliation of being discarded, had become the catalyst for something extraordinary. I had found my purpose, my own little miracle garden, and in it, I was blooming. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Jessica and James had no idea what was coming. They thought they had discarded me like a withered houseplant. They had no idea what kind of seeds they had sown. The pungent smell of fertilizer and damp earth usually soothed me, but today it felt heavy, like a premonition. Months had passed since I started working at Mitchell's Garden Center, a lifeline Sarah Mitchell threw me when I was at my lowest. "Maggie," she'd said that first day, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners, "everyone deserves a second chance." And I was determined to make the most of mine. I'd learned the ropes quickly: potting plants, arranging displays, and even helping customers with their gardening woes. But something had been nagging at me, a growing unease about the way things were run. It started small, like noticing perfectly good terracotta pots chipped and discarded in the back. Such a waste, I'd muttered to myself, rescuing a few to repot some leggy ferns. Then I saw the wilting orchids, marked down for clearance, their delicate blooms drooping. They just need a little TLC, I thought, gently coaxing them back to life with a homemade orchid tonic. My concern deepened when I saw the sheer volume of plants deemed unsalvageable, shrubs with broken branches, perennials with brown leaves, even young trees with damaged roots. They were destined for the compost heap, a mountain of potential beauty left to rot. "Mr. Henderson," I asked the gruff groundskeeper one afternoon, "why do we throw away so many plants?" He just shrugged. "They're no good anymore. Company policy." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. These weren't dead plants. They were just neglected, like I had been. Discarded. The thought stung, but it also sparked an idea, a flicker of defiance, of reclaiming something lost. I started spending my lunch breaks in the reject section, examining the discarded plants. I pruned the dead leaves, treated the damaged roots, and repotted them in fresh soil. I talked to them, whispered encouragement, just like I used to with my own garden back when I had a home, a family, a life. Within a few weeks, something miraculous started to happen. The brown leaves turned green, the drooping stems perked up, and tiny buds appeared on the seemingly barren branches. My little corner of the garden center, once a graveyard of forgotten plants, was transforming into a vibrant oasis. One day, Sarah Mitchell walked by and stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened, taking in the flourishing plants. "Maggie," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "What is all this?" I explained my process, my passion for bringing these discarded plants back to life. "It's like they just needed a second chance," I said, echoing her words from months ago. A slow smile spread across her face. "Maggie," she said, "you have a gift." The next day, Sarah called me into her office. "I've been thinking about what you've been doing with those plants," she began. "It's remarkable." She leaned forward, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "I have a proposition for you." My heart pounded. I knew this could be the turning point, the chance to rebuild my life, to prove Jessica and Julian wrong, to show them that discarding me was the biggest mistake they ever made. "I want you to head up a new division of the garden center," Sarah continued, "a rescue and rehabilitation section. You'll be in charge of sourcing discarded plants, nurturing them back to health, and selling them at a discounted price." I could barely contain my excitement. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "This is amazing." Sarah smiled. "You deserve it, Maggie. You've turned something broken into something beautiful, and I think it's going to be incredibly successful." She handed me a contract, the terms outlining a generous salary and a percentage of the profits. I signed without hesitation. As I left her office, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a small seed, just like the ones I nurtured back to life, but I knew it held the potential to grow into something extraordinary, something that would not only change my life, but maybe, just maybe, make Jessica and Julian regret the day they turned their backs on me. The image of their faces when they discovered what I had achieved fueled my resolve. They thought they were getting rid of a burden, They had no idea they were planting the seeds of my success. I looked down at my hands, still stained with soil. They weren't just the hands of a gardener anymore. They were the hands of a businesswoman, a survivor, a woman about to build an empire from the scraps they left behind. The air, thick with the scent of fertilizer and damp earth, suddenly felt lighter, full of promise. It was the smell of my future. The chip paint on the motel room walls seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of Jessica's words, "You're a burden, Mom. We can't afford to keep you." I'd spent weeks staring at those walls, replaying the scene in my head, the way Julian had just stood there, silent, nodding. But today, something shifted. The despair that had clung to me like a shroud began to lift. I saw a small, wilted fern discarded by the dumpster outside, its leaves brown and brittle. A pang of sympathy, an echo of my own plight, resonated within me. "I can fix you," I murmured, picking it up. Back in my room, I carefully repotted the fern, trimming the dead fronds, whispering encouragement as I worked. It wasn't much, but it was something to do, a tiny spark of purpose in the vast emptiness of my days. I'd always loved gardening back at the house, tending to my rose bushes and herb garden. James used to tease me, saying I talked to the plants more than I talked to him. They listened better, I'd retort, grinning. The next day, I found another discarded plant, a spider plant this time, its long tendrils drooping. "You look a little sad, don't you?" I said, tucking it under my arm. I started collecting other discarded greenery, casualties of neglect and indifference. My tiny motel room began to resemble a miniature jungle, filled with limp leaves and drooping stems. I spent hours nurturing them, learning their individual needs, coaxing them back to life. "Drink up," I'd tell a thirsty peace lily. "You'll be beautiful again, you just wait and see." And slowly, miraculously, they began to respond. The fern unfurled new, vibrant green fronds. The spider plant perked up, its tendrils reaching out like grateful fingers. Even a nearly dead cactus I'd found, abandoned in a cracked pot, began to show signs of life. One afternoon, as I was tending to my growing collection, Mrs. Rodriguez, the motel manager, knocked on my door. "What are you doing in there, Mrs. Williams?" she asked, a suspicious edge to her voice. "Just a little gardening," I replied, opening the door a crack. She peered inside, her eyes widening at the sight of my flourishing indoor garden. "My goodness," she breathed, stepping inside. "You've worked miracles with these plants." I shrugged, a little embarrassed by her praise. "They just needed a little love," I said. Mrs. Rodriguez ran a hand over a glossy philodendron leaf. "My sister has a terrible black thumb," she confided. "She keeps killing her plants. Would you be willing to take a look at them?" I hesitated. It had never occurred to me that I could turn my newfound passion into something more. "I don't know," I began, but Mrs. Rodriguez cut me off. "I'd be happy to pay you, of course," she said, "and I'm sure my sister would be too." I thought about Jessica and Julian, their smug faces, the way they dismissed me as useless. A flicker of something hard and determined ignited within me. "All right," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'll do it." Word of my plant reviving skills spread quickly. Soon, I was getting calls from all over town. People brought me their ailing plants, their wilted flowers, their neglected succulents. I don't know what to do with this, they'd say, their voices filled with desperation. Can you save it? And more often than not, I could. I rented a small storage unit to house my growing inventory, transforming it into a makeshift greenhouse. I started visiting nurseries, learning about different plant species, experimenting with propagation techniques. My days were long and filled with hard work, but I found a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The plants became my therapy, my solace, my silent companions in the quiet hours. One evening, as I was leaving the storage unit, a sleek black car pulled up beside me. A woman in a tailored business suit stepped out. "Margaret Williams?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "I own Mitchell's Garden Center. I've heard about your work." My heart pounded in my chest. Mitchell's Garden Center was the largest and most prestigious nursery in the area. What could she possibly want with me? "I'm expanding my business, Ms. Mitchell continued, her eyes sharp and assessing. "And I need someone with your talent. I'm offering you a position as a plant rehabilitation specialist." I stared at her, speechless. A position at Mitchell's. It was more than I could have ever imagined. "We can discuss the details further," Ms. Mitchell said, handing me her card. "But I think you'll find my offer very appealing." I clutched the card in my hand, a strange mix of excitement and disbelief coursing through me. Looking up at the sky, I could almost hear my late husband's voice, a gentle chuckle in the wind. "See, Maggie," he seemed to say, "I told you you could do anything you set your mind to." And for the first time since leaving Jane's and Jessica's house, I felt a surge of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could build something beautiful from the ashes of my old life, something they wouldn't be able to ignore. Rain hammered against the corrugated iron roof of Mitchell's Garden Center, a sound that used to fill me with a sense of peace. Today, it felt like a drumbeat, echoing the anxiety thrumming in my chest. It had been 6 weeks since I started working here. 6 weeks of back-breaking labor, hauling soil, pruning roses, and learning the delicate art of coaxing life back into neglected plants. 6 weeks since Jessica had sneered, "Honestly, Mom, you're useless. You can't even keep a houseplant alive, let alone contribute anything meaningful." Those words, sharp as shards of glass, had propelled me forward, fueled my determination to prove her wrong. Today was the day. Today, I presented Sarah Mitchell with the fruits of my labor collection of rescued plants, once destined for the compost heap, now vibrant and bursting with new life. I carefully wheeled the trolley laden with my rejects, as Sarah jokingly called them, into her office. Each pot, each leaf, represented hours of dedicated work, a testament to my newfound passion. Nerves tightened in my stomach. "Sarah, you have a moment?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. She looked up from her paperwork, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Maggie, come in, come in. What have you got there?" I took a deep breath and began to explain my project. I noticed we were throwing away a lot of plants that just needed a little TLC, I said, gesturing to the trolley. I thought, maybe I could try to rehabilitate them. Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Rehabilitate?" she repeated, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I'll be honest, Maggie, Most of these were beyond saving. Root rot, pests, you name it. I know, I replied, my heart pounding. This was it. But look, I lifted a fern. Its fronds, once withered and brown, now a cascade of vibrant green. This one just needed repotting and a little extra humidity. I pointed to a peace lily, its white blooms standing proud. This one was suffering from overwatering. A little adjustment, and voila, Sarah moved closer, her eyes widening as she inspected each plant. She picked up a small, almost bare succulent I'd nursed back to health. This little guy was practically a skeleton when I last saw it. She murmured, turning it over in her hands. How did you? I explained my process, the techniques I'd developed, the careful observation and attention to detail that had yielded these remarkable results. Sarah listened intently, occasionally interjecting with a question or a thoughtful hum. When I finished, a silence settled over the room, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. I held my breath, waiting for her verdict. Finally, Sarah looked up, her eyes shining. "Maggie," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "This is incredible, truly incredible." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. "These aren't rejects anymore, Maggie," Sarah continued, a grin spreading across her face. "These are treasures." She paced around the trolley, her gaze lingering on each revitalized plant. "We could sell these, Maggie. People would love them. Sell them." The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. I had been so focused on proving myself, on proving Jessica wrong, that I hadn't considered the commercial potential of my little project. I don't know what to say," I stammered, feeling a flicker of something new, something exciting, taking root within me. "Say you'll let me give you a raise and a dedicated space to work your magic," Sarah replied, her eyes twinkling. "Let's call it the Maggie's Miracles section." "Maggie's Miracles," I repeated, a smile slowly blooming on my face. It sounded perfect. "We'll start small," Sarah continued, her enthusiasm contagious. "See how they sell. But I have a feeling, Maggie, that this is just the beginning." The rain outside seemed to soften, the drumming replaced by a gentle patter. As I looked at Sarah, her face beaming with confidence in me, in my abilities, I knew she was right. This was just the beginning. I had been discarded, deemed useless, but like the plants I'd rescued, I had found a way to thrive. I had taken something broken and made it beautiful, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, a strength that would take me further than I could ever have imagined. Further, perhaps, than Jessica and Julian, in their comfortable complacency, could ever dream of going. The thought sent a thrill of anticipation through me, a quiet hum of satisfaction beneath the gentle rhythm of the rain. I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. The crisp autumn air swirled fallen leaves around my ankles as I walked to Mitchell's garden center. Months had passed since I'd started working there. Months since Jessica had sneered, "You'll be begging us to take you back." The memory still stung, but it was a dull ache now, overshadowed by the quiet satisfaction I felt each morning. Today was different, though. Today wasn't about pruning roses or potting ferns. Sarah Mitchell, the owner, had called me into her office, a serious expression on her face. Maggie, she began, her voice unusually hesitant. I need to talk to you about the future of the garden center. My stomach tightened. Was I about to lose my job? Had I done something wrong? Of course, Sarah, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. What is it? Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped on her desk. The business is thriving, beyond anything I could have imagined. A small smile played on her lips. And it's largely thanks to you. Your talent with those rescued plants, she chuckled. It's remarkable. People are coming from miles around just to see what you've brought back to life. I blushed, remembering the years I'd spent nurturing those discarded plants, coaxing them back to health. It was a quiet joy, a balm for the wounds Jessica and Julian had inflicted. I enjoy it, I admitted simply. It's therapeutic. Well, your therapy, Sarah said, her eyes twinkling, has become quite the profitable enterprise. She paused, drawing a deep breath. Maggie, I'm getting older. I've been thinking about selling the garden center, retiring somewhere warm. My heart sank. There it was, the other shoe dropping. But, Sarah continued, holding up a hand to stop my burgeoning panic. I've had a change of heart. She leaned in conspiratorially. What if, instead of selling to some faceless corporation, it partnered with you? My breath caught in my throat. Partnered with me, I echoed, stunned. Beauty don't have any money. The memory of Jessica's cruel laughter, the echo of their slammed door, reverberated in my mind. I have practically nothing. Sarah smiled gently. Maggie, you have more than you think. You have talent, dedication, and a unique vision. You've already transformed this business. Imagine what we could do together. She slid a folder across the desk. I've had my lawyer draw up a partnership agreement, 50-50. We share the profits, the responsibilities, everything. I stared at the folder, my mind reeling. From homeless to business owner, it was a dizzying thought. I looked up at Sarah, searching her face for any hint of doubt, any sign that this was some elaborate joke. But her expression was open, sincere. Maggie, she said softly, I trust you. I believe in you. And I think this could be something truly special. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and picked up the folder. The paper felt crisp and substantial beneath my fingertips. This was real. The following months were a whirlwind. Sarah and I worked side by side, transforming Mitchell's Garden Center into something even more extraordinary. We expanded the rescued plant section, creating a dedicated revival room that became a customer favorite. We introduced workshops, teaching people how to nurture their own green spaces, how to find beauty in the seemingly broken. We even started an online store, shipping our revived plants across the country. The business boomed. Word spread about the miracle worker at Mitchell's, the woman who could bring any plant back from the brink. I was no longer the discarded mother, the unwanted burden. I was Maggie, the plant whisperer, the co-owner of a thriving business. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by the lush greenery I'd cultivated, a wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't just the satisfaction of success, the sweet taste of revenge. It was something deeper, something more profound. I had found my purpose. I had built something beautiful from the ashes of my broken life, and in that moment, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't about making Jessica and Julian suffer. It was about proving to myself, to the world, that I was capable of so much more than they had ever imagined. I glanced at the framed photograph on my desk, a picture of my late husband, his eyes twinkling with pride. "See, honey," I whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles around my eyes. "I'm doing just fine." The phone rang, jarring me from my reverie. It was Sarah. "Maggie," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "You won't believe this. We just got an offer for the franchise rights." My heart skipped a beat. Franchise rights. This was bigger than I could have ever dreamed. The crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I surveyed the bustling aisles of the newest garden center, the fifth one to carry my revitalized plants this year. 2 years ago, Jessica had sneered, "You'll be begging on the streets, Mother." Little did she know, I wouldn't be begging. I'd be supplying. This particular center, green thumb galore, was enormous, a veritable cathedral of greenery. I spotted my rescued ferns, their fronds unfurling vibrantly, nestled amongst the other foliage. "Your plants are doing remarkably well, Ms. Williams," the manager, a cheerful woman named Brenda, said, approaching with a clipboard. "We've had to restock twice already this week." I smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through me. "That's wonderful to hear, Brenda." My initial venture into plant rehabilitation had been born out of necessity, a way to supplement the meager bookkeeping income I'd pieced together after James and Jessica had cast me aside. Finding solace and a strange sort of therapy in nurturing neglected plants back to health, I'd started small, rescuing discarded specimens from the back alleys of other garden centers. My tiny motel room had transformed into a miniature jungle, each revived leaf a small victory against the despair that had threatened to engulf me. "I never thought I had a green thumb," I admitted to Brenda, adjusting a slightly crooked pot of ivy. "But these little guys seem to respond to me." "They certainly do," Brenda agreed, chuckling. "We've had customers specifically asking for your miracle plants, as they're calling them." Miracle plants. The phrase resonated deeply. They were a testament to my own resilience, my ability to blossom again after being so carelessly discarded. "If this keeps up," Brenda continued, her voice tinged with excitement, "we might need to think about a dedicated section just for your stock." A dedicated section. Just 2 years ago, I'd been crammed into a cramped motel room, wondering where my next meal would come from. Now, I was being offered prime retail space. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'd be happy to discuss that," I replied, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, though my heart was doing a little victory dance. Later that day, as I drove my used but reliable sedan between two other garden centers that carried my plants, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The bookkeeping work, while steady, had barely kept me afloat, but the plant business, that was something else entirely. It was growing faster than I could have imagined. "Just need to find a bigger space to work," I murmured to myself, pulling into the parking lot of Blooming Buds. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was waiting for me near the entrance, a wide grin splitting his face. "Maggie, you won't believe this," he boomed, waving a piece of paper. "Sales are through the roof. These rejuvenated orchids are flying off the shelves. He gestured towards a display overflowing with vibrant purple and white blooms. I'd found those orchids, wilted and forlorn, at the back of a supermarket, their beauty hidden beneath layers of neglect. A few weeks of care and attention, and they were showstoppers. I'm glad they're doing so well, I responded, feeling a swell of pride. Mr. Henderson lowered his voice conspiratorially. I've been thinking, he began, glancing round, as if sharing a secret. What if, and this is just a thought, what if we partnered up? I expand my greenhouse space, you bring your magic touch, and we split the profits. My breath hitched. A partnership, a real, legitimate business. It was more than I dared to dream of. I'd need to think about it. Mr. Henderson, I stammered, my mind reeling. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. Take your time, Maggie. But this could be huge. Huge? The drive home that evening felt surreal. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold against the darkening sky. Huge? The word echoed in my mind. From a discarded wife and mother, left with nothing, to a potential business partner. It was a transformation even I still struggled to comprehend. As I pulled into the driveway of my small, cozy cottage, a far cry from the cramped motel room, I noticed a sleek, unfamiliar car parked across the street. Curiosity piqued. I watched as Jessica and Julian stepped out, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion. And was that envy? They stared at my little house, then at the modest, but brand new, sign I'd placed in the flower bed. Maggie's Miracles Plant Rehabilitation and Design. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Julian just shook his head, a bewildered expression on his face. I didn't need to hear their words. Their faces spoke volumes. They hadn't expected me to survive, let alone thrive. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that this was just the beginning. Mr. Henderson's offer was just one of several. My miracle plants were about to become an empire. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of my apartment, illuminating the vibrant green leaves of my fiddle-leaf fig. I remembered Jessica sneering, "You'll be living under a bridge with those weeds, Mom." Well, those weeds had paid for this view overlooking the city, a view far superior to anything Jessica and Julian could ever dream of. I ran my hand over the smooth leather of the couch, a stark contrast to the scratchy motel blankets that had been my only comfort not so long ago. Who would have thought? I murmured to myself, a small smile playing on my lips. From scavenging discarded plants tothus, I walked over to the sleek, modern desk in the corner, the polished wood gleaming under the light. My laptop sat open, displaying the latest figures for Bloom Again, my plant rehabilitation business. $8 million, I whispered, the number still feeling surreal. $8 million. Enough to buy a small island, a fleet of fancy cars, or 10 of the houses Jessica and Julian had so cruelly kept me from. I closed the laptop, the click echoing the finality of my past life. I wasn't interested in rubbing their noses in my success. Not directly anyway. My revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about building a life so fulfilling, so vibrant, that their petty cruelty faded into insignificance. My gaze drifted to a framed photo on the desk. It was me, holding a tiny, withered succulent I'd rescued from a dumpster behind Sarah Mitchell's garden center. That tiny plant, barely clinging to life, was the seed of everything I had now. Sarah had seen something in me that day, a passion for bringing life back to the forgotten. "You have a gift, Maggie," she'd said, her kind eyes twinkling. "These plants respond to you." She'd offered me a job, a lifeline when I was drowning in despair, and from that single act of kindness, bloom again had blossomed. I picked up the photo, tracing the outline of the little succulent with my finger. I remembered the hours I'd spent in the back of Sarah's shop, nurturing neglected plants back to health. I'd learned everything I could, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. I experimented with different soils, lighting, and techniques, discovering a knack for coaxing life out of even the most damaged specimens. People underestimate the resilience of plants, I mused, just like they underestimated me. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Sarah. "Maggie, darling, have you seen the latest issue of Urban Gardens?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You're on the cover." My heart skipped a beat. The cover of Urban Gardens, the most prestigious publication in the industry. I hadn't even dared to dream of such recognition. "To haven't," I stammered, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "Oh, you must," Sarah exclaimed. "They're calling you the Plant Whisperer. It's a wonderful article, Maggie. You deserve all the praise." After hanging up, I rushed to my tablet and pulled up the magazine's website. There I was, beaming from the cover, surrounded by lush greenery. The headline read, "From Homeless to Horticultural Heroine, Maggie Williams' Inspiring Journey." I read the article, tears welling up in my eyes. It chronicled my story, from the lowest point of being kicked out of my son's home to the triumph of building bloom again. It talked about my innovative techniques, my dedication to sustainability, and my passion for giving discarded plants a second chance. As I finished reading, a wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't just pride in my accomplishments. It was a profound sense of peace. I had taken the worst experience of my life and turned it into something beautiful. I had proven Jessica and Julian wrong, not by seeking revenge, but by creating a life richer and more meaningful than anything they could imagine. And in doing so, I had found something I never knew I was missing, a sense of purpose, a passion that ignited my soul. The setting sun cast long shadows across my apartment, painting the walls in hues of orange and gold. I looked out at the twinkling city lights, a sense of gratitude filling my heart. I had come so far from that desolate motel room. I had more than just a roof over my head. I had a home, a thriving business, and the unwavering support of people who believed in me. I raised a glass of sparkling water in a silent toast to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the sweet, quiet satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. The phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Curiosity piqued. I opened it. "Mom, it's James."